There's a specific list of behaviors that show up again and again in the lives of people who left a narcissist months, sometimes years ago, behaviors that make absolutely no sense if you believe the story he's telling everyone about how completely over you he is. Because here's what he wants you and everyone around you to believe: that he's moved on effortlessly, that your absence barely registered, that he's thriving in ways that prove he never really needed you as much as you thought he did. This is the story. And for a while, especially if you're still in the raw, disoriented aftermath of leaving, you might actually believe it. You might look at his apparent ease, his new relationship, his seemingly untouched confidence, and wonder if you were the only one who felt the weight of everything that happened. But here's the truth almost nobody tells you clearly enough. Obsession doesn't always look like longing. It doesn't always look like tearful voicemails or desperate pleading. Sometimes, especially with a narcissist, obsession wears a mask so convincing that it fools almost everyone watching from the outside, including often you. Today, we're walking through the specific signs that reveal a narcissist is still deeply, quietly obsessed with you, regardless of how convincingly he performs indifference. And by the end of this, you're going to understand something that changes how you interpret every strange, seemingly disconnected piece of information that's reached you since you left. Let's start with the first sign, because it's often the most confusing one to witness, precisely because it looks like the opposite of obsession on the surface. Sign 1. His life suddenly becomes a performance staged for an audience of one. Watch closely at what happens to someone's social media, their public behavior, their visibility in shared spaces, once a narcissist realizes you're genuinely gone. If his online presence suddenly intensifies, more photos, more curated moments of apparent happiness, more visible markers of success and thriving than existed at any point before you left. This isn't coincidental timing. This is theater, and you are the only audience member who actually matters. Here's why this distinction is so important to understand. Genuine moving on doesn't require an audience. Someone who has authentically processed a relationship's ending and built real contentment afterward doesn't typically need to broadcast that contentment with escalating intensity, timed specifically around moments when you're most likely to see it. Real peace is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require constant visible proof. What you're actually witnessing when someone's visible happiness suddenly intensifies dramatically right after a breakup is something closer to a desperate attempt to manufacture the exact reaction he can no longer produce through direct contact. He can't reach you anymore, can't provoke you, can't manipulate you through conversation. So instead, he performs a version of thriving specifically engineered to reach you indirectly, hoping that seeing him doing so well without you will produce jealousy, regret, or renewed interest strong enough to break your silence. This is obsession wearing the costume of indifference. And once you understand the mechanism, the performance becomes almost impossible to mistake for genuine peace. Genuine peace doesn't need you to see it. This performance exists specifically because it does. Sign 2. Mutual friends start receiving oddly specific questions about your life. If you're hearing through people who still have contact with both of you that he's been asking unusually detailed questions, not just "how is she doing," but specific inquiries about who you've been spending time with, whether you seem happy, whether you've mentioned him at all, whether you've started seeing anyone new, understand exactly what this represents. This isn't casual curiosity. This is active intelligence gathering, driven by an obsession he's not willing to express directly, but also can't fully suppress. Genuine indifference doesn't generate this kind of specific, ongoing curiosity. If he'd truly moved past the relationship the way he claims, your daily life would simply stop being relevant information he needs to collect. The fact that he's still tracking details, still positioning mutual friends as unwitting informants, reveals that some part of him remains intensely focused on maintaining a picture of your life. precisely because losing access to that picture feels intolerable, even if he'd never admit this consciously. This pattern often intensifies rather than fades over time, which confuses people who assume natural curiosity should diminish the further removed someone becomes from a relationship. But obsession doesn't follow this natural fading pattern. If anything, the less direct information he can access, the more elaborate and persistent his indirect methods of gathering it tend to become. Sign 3. He reaches out during moments specifically calibrated to interrupt your peace, not during moments of genuine reflection. Pay close attention to when contact attempts actually arrive, because timing reveals almost everything about what's actually motivating them. Someone processing genuine grief, genuine reflection, genuine growth tends to reach out, if they reach out at all, during quiet moments of authentic realization, an anniversary that triggers real memory, a moment of genuine insight into their own behavior, a milestone that naturally invites reflection on what was lost. A narcissist still obsessed with maintaining relevance in your life, by contrast, tends to reach out during moments specifically timed to disrupt whatever positive momentum you've built. Right after you post something suggesting genuine happiness, right around a holiday or event where his absence might otherwise go unnoticed, right when mutual friends mention you've seemed particularly at peace lately. This timing isn't coincidental sentiment. It's calculated interruption, designed specifically to reinsert himself into moments where his absence was actually working in your favor. This pattern reveals something crucial about the actual nature of his continued interest. It was never really about missing the relationship itself, or missing you as a person he genuinely valued. It's about maintaining psychological relevance in your life, refusing to let you experience sustained periods of peace or progress that don't somehow trace back to him in some way. Sign 4. He can't stop referencing the relationship, even in conversations that have nothing to do with you. If you're hearing, through any channel, that he brings up specifics from your relationship in conversations where you're not even the topic, mentioning something you used to say, referencing an inside joke from your relationship while talking to someone entirely unrelated, comparing new experiences unfavorably or favorably to things you did together, this reveals something significant about how much unprocessed mental real estate you continue to occupy in his internal world. Genuine indifference doesn't produce this kind of intrusive reference. If someone has actually released their emotional investment in a relationship, that relationship simply stops surfacing unprompted in unrelated conversations. The fact that you continue appearing, uninvited, in contexts that have nothing to do with you suggests something closer to rumination than resolution. A mind that keeps circling back to unfinished business it hasn't figured out how to close. Together, these first 4 signs paint a picture that directly contradicts the story a narcissist typically wants you and everyone around him to believe. The performance of thriving, the persistent information gathering, the calculated timing of contact attempts, the intrusive references in unrelated conversations. None of this reflects genuine peace or authentic moving on. It reflects something closer to obsession, still actively operating, simply channeled through indirect methods because direct access has finally completely been removed. Let's continue through the remaining signs, because understanding the full picture matters enormously for anyone currently trying to interpret confusing, contradictory information reaching them about a narcissistic ex who claims, loudly and often, to have moved on completely. Sign 5. He devalues your replacement relationships with a specificity that reveals genuine threat, not casual opinion. If you hear that he's made comments about whoever you're seeing now, or whoever mutual friends assume you might eventually see, pay close attention to the specificity and intensity of these comments. Genuine indifference produces, at most, a passing acknowledgement, if any reaction at all. Someone who has truly released emotional investment in you doesn't typically have strong opinions about your new relationships because your romantic life has stopped being something that registers as personally significant to him. But watch for comments that go beyond casual observation into something more pointed. Suggestions that whoever you're with now isn't good enough for you. Subtle insinuations that this new relationship won't last. Dismissive characterizations delivered with more intensity than the situation would seem to warrant from someone who claims not to care anymore. This specificity reveals genuine threat, not casual opinion. He's not simply commenting on your life from a place of detached curiosity. He's responding to something that feels like direct competition, something that challenges a narrative he's still invested in maintaining. That no one else could possibly understand you, appreciate you, or love you the way he did. This pattern often intensifies specifically when your new relationship appears genuinely healthy and stable, rather than fading the way you'd expect if his primary concern were simply your well-being. This intensification reveals exactly what's actually driving the reaction. Not concern for your happiness, but discomfort with evidence that his own irreplaceability was never as certain as he needed to believe. Sign 6. He maintains contact with people specifically positioned to relay information back to you, long after any genuine friendship with those people would reasonably continue. Notice whether he's maintained relationships with your friends, your family members, or mutual acquaintances who have little independent reason to stay connected to him once the actual relationship between you ended. If these connections persist, particularly if they persist with unusual effort or frequency on his part, consider what function they're actually serving. Genuine friendships that happen to exist independent of your relationship with him would naturally continue regardless of the breakup, sustained by whatever authentic connection existed before you were ever involved. But connections that seem to exist primarily as channels of information, maintained with effort disproportionate to any independent friendship value, suggest something different. A deliberate strategy for maintaining surveillance and relevance in your life, using people who have unwittingly become intermediaries in an ongoing campaign he's not willing to conduct directly. This pattern often becomes visible through small but telling details. The friend who mentions he asks about you surprisingly often. The family member who seems to always have an update on his life to share whether you asked for it or not. The mutual acquaintance who seems oddly positioned between both of your social worlds in a way that feels less like coincidence and more like calculated placement. Sign 7. His reaction to your silence is disproportionate to the actual relationship you shared. This final sign might be the most revealing of all, because it addresses something crucial about proportion and context. If the relationship genuinely ended amicably, if his stated position is that you both simply grew apart or wanted different things, then his reaction to your subsequent silence, your lack of continued engagement, your genuine movement toward a life that doesn't include him, should theoretically be relatively mild. Mild disappointment, perhaps. General well wishes. The kind of measured response someone offers when a relationship ends without deep, unresolved investment remaining on either side. Instead, watch for reactions that seem wildly disproportionate to this stated narrative. Genuine anger at your silence, when he claims to have wanted the same ending you did. Visible distress at your apparent thriving, when he claims your happiness was never something he opposed. Escalating attempts at contact that seem to intensify precisely because you're not responding, rather than naturally fading the way genuine acceptance of an ending would predict. This disproportion reveals the actual gap between what he's telling everyone, including possibly himself, and what he's genuinely experiencing internally. If someone's reaction to your continued silence and continued peace consistently exceeds what the stated narrative of the relationship's ending would reasonably produce, this excess itself is the evidence. It reveals investment that hasn't actually resolved, regardless of how convincingly the performance of resolution has been constructed for public consumption. Together, these seven signs, the performed thriving, the specific information gathering, the calculated timing of contact, the intrusive references, the pointed devaluation of your new relationships, the maintained surveillance channels through mutual connections, and the disproportionate reaction to your silence, reveal something that directly contradicts almost every narcissist's preferred public narrative about how effortlessly they've moved past you. Understanding this pattern in full matters enormously, not because knowing he's still obsessed should change how you move forward, but because it prevents you from doubting your own experience of the relationship based on his convincing public performance of having barely been affected by its ending at all. Because here's the crucial distinction that finally resolves the confusion so many people feel when they recognize these seven signs in their own situation. Understanding that a narcissist remains obsessed with you doesn't mean you should do anything differently. It doesn't mean you should reach out. Doesn't mean you should feel flattered. Doesn't mean this obsession represents some hidden depth of genuine love finally revealing itself now that it's too late. This is worth stating directly because it's easy, after recognizing these patterns clearly, to slip into a kind of quiet vindication that slowly transforms into something more dangerous. The hope that his obsession somehow proves what you always secretly wanted proven, that the connection was real, that you mattered as much as you always believed you did, that maybe, if he's still this affected, there's something worth revisiting after all. Here's what needs to be understood clearly about what this obsession actually represents, because it's fundamentally different from what genuine love or genuine remorse would look like. Everything we've discussed throughout this conversation, the performed thriving, the information gathering, the calculated timing, the intrusive references, the pointed devaluation, the maintained surveillance, the disproportionate reactions, none of it is actually about you specifically in the way that would matter for any kind of healthy reconciliation. It's about his relationship to control, to relevance, to the specific psychological architecture we've discussed extensively throughout previous conversations, one that cannot tolerate genuine irrelevance in someone else's life, regardless of whether that someone else was ever treated with the care and respect his continued obsession might suggest he now recognizes you deserved. This distinction matters enormously because obsession and love are not the same thing, even though they can look remarkably similar from a distance, especially to someone who spent years hoping to see exactly this kind of intense, persistent attention as proof of genuine feeling. Real love, even complicated, imperfect, ultimately unsuccessful love, tends to produce genuine respect for someone else's autonomy, genuine capacity to release someone whose happiness might exist independent of your own involvement in it. Obsession produces the opposite, an inability to tolerate that independent happiness, a compulsive need to remain relevant regardless of whether that relevance serves your well-being or theirs. This is why recognizing these seven signs should function as confirmation rather than invitation. Confirmation that your instincts about the relationship were accurate, that you weren't imagining the intensity or the difficulty of what you experienced, that the person you left genuinely does struggle with releasing control over people, even after those relationships have definitively ended. But this confirmation should never function as an invitation to re-engage, because everything driving this obsession remains exactly the same as everything that made the original relationship unsustainable in the first place. Here's what actually matters. Once you've moved past the initial validation of recognizing these patterns clearly, what you do with this understanding now. And the answer, consistently, across every situation where these signs appear, is the same regardless of how intensely his obsession seems to manifest. You continue building your life. You continue maintaining your silence or your minimal boundaried engagement if complete separation isn't practically possible. You continue treating his continued obsession as information about him rather than as something requiring any response, adjustment, or engagement from you. This is genuinely difficult, especially in moments when part of you might crave exactly this kind of proof that you mattered, that the relationship wasn't simply something he moved past without a second thought. But here's the truth that ultimately matters more than any validation his obsession might provide. Your worth was never actually contingent on whether he continues struggling to release you. You were worthy of genuine love, genuine respect, genuine partnership throughout the entire relationship, regardless of whether he was capable of providing it, and regardless of whether his current obsession reflects some delayed recognition of what he lost. His obsession, however intense, however persistent, however much it might confirm that you were never as replaceable as his public performance suggested, doesn't actually require anything from you. It doesn't require your engagement, your response, your validation, or your reconsideration. It simply exists as a genuine reflection of his own psychological limitations, entirely separate from whatever life you're continuing to build on your own terms, according to your own values, independent of whether he ever manages to fully release his grip on relevance in your story. So if you're recognizing these 7 signs clearly in your own situation, understand exactly what this recognition should and shouldn't change. It should change your confidence in your own perception, your own memory of what actually happened throughout the relationship, your own understanding that the connection, however complicated, was genuinely significant enough to produce this lingering obsession. It shouldn't change your trajectory, your boundaries, your continued distance, or your commitment to building a life that exists entirely independent of whether he ever fully lets go. Because here's the final truth worth carrying forward from everything we've discussed today. His inability to move on doesn't obligate you to wait around for him to figure it out. It doesn't require your patience, your reconsideration, or your continued attention. It simply confirms something you likely already knew, somewhere beneath the confusion his public performance created, that you were never as forgettable as he needed everyone, including himself, to believe. You don't need his obsession to validate your worth. You already know what you survived. And whether he ever fully releases his grip on relevance in your life or not, you get to keep building yours, completely, peacefully, entirely on your own terms. That was always the only thing that actually mattered. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for next video and don't forget to subscribe.